Hello, everyone. I'm Camila Escalante, and I'm here with Ali Vargas, and this is our new weekly program and podcast, Latin America Review. Each week, we'll be analyzing some of the most important issues of Latin America and the Caribbean with some really great guests.
And we'll be delving into the culture, history, music, and food of each country in question. Now, half of the episodes will be unlocked, and the other half will be for our amazing subscribers on Patreon who've made all our work possible up until now. So make sure to sign up. The link is in the description, and enjoy the show.
Joining us now from Caracas, Venezuela, is Diego Sequera of the Venezuelan outlet, Misión, Verdad. Diego, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And also congrats for this new project you're on.
Thank you so much. So there's a lot going on in Venezuela, a lot to talk about. And so we wanted to get Venezuela right in at the beginning. Right now in the news is President Nicolas Maduro's trip to Eurasia, where he has visited 5 different countries. And this is, of course, linked to the economic recovery of the country. He skipped out on the Summit of the Americas, and we've seen him take a trip that has taken him to Turkey, which is a NATO country, and other OPEC countries. Tell us a little bit about what is going on this trip and why it's so significant at this time.
Well, it's significant for several reasons. One of them, of course, it's the clear and even strong message it sends to this part of the world, to the summit, to the U.S. rules-based order, regionally and globally, right? So, and after the whole zombie summit and everything that happened during and the tragicomic outcome, which of course Venezuela was excluded, just like our other fellow troika of tyranny countries such as Nicaragua and Cuba, as you well know. And it states the message that we didn't need this. And here's where we are looking at and what the future looks like, and where are we going to strengthen relationships, strike new agreements, and follow I think it's the organic, natural drive of productive energy right now in the world. And of course, that takes us immediately to Asia and Eurasian, the whole Eurasian platform in particular. So in that sense, it tells you also about what kind of order and what kind of friendships also Venezuela defended and had during its worst days. This is also very important, because mind you that the last time that Nicolas Maduro did a tour of this size and scale, it was precisely with most of the countries he's visiting now. I mean, we're talking not only key historic allies of Venezuela, such as Iran or Algeria, or probably Russia, we don't know yet, or China, but also the usual partners like the Gulf monarchies, Kuwait, and and you can add up now Turkey and Azerbaijan, right? So excluding the last two, Nicolas Maduro did the same thing back in 2015, 7 years ago, but with a very different message, regardless of course, it was under agreements and also credits and you can say in a way the usual kind of interaction that Venezuela would have in any given time. But the thing is that it happened precisely when Venezuela was going into its worst moment definitely in recent history. Economically, socially, security-wise, geopolitically, you name it. I mean, that's the whole deal about hybrid warfare in a nutshell. It overwhelms everything, and it also, in that context, it's going to enhance, it's going to deform the whole complexities, contradictions, flaws, and so on, especially on in this case, especially on the economic and finance area of any given country. That's like, part of sanctions 101. And also, well, getting the country prepared for what was coming. So the message was like, hey guys, I need some help here. We're going to get into a lot of turbulence now. But now there's a very different message, very symbolical also in several ways, because I'm back and we prevailed. We were able to overcome probably the most dangerous moment in recent history in the region. We were able to circumvent the sanction regime, and each and every aspect of let's call it the maximum pressure campaign, thinking about the Trump administration, but you can't think only on that period of time. That's only 4 years. You have several years before that where all the sanction regime was laid, the groundwork was laid, and then we had the Guaidó cycle, that basically his political demise, and also the shift, the structural shift that has happened in the transatlantic north, such as COVID and then the Ukraine war, deflected a bit the attention on Venezuela. So that's part of the message, because Venezuela has been able to not collapse completely, regardless of course, taking a lot of pain and a lot of wounds and scars that now we're dealing with, and which are, it's not so easy to assess. Of course, you can assess the immediate ones, but you also have the others, which are more cultural, psychological, historical. But at least we're now able to see that, instead of just, struggling to have a daily normal life for common people in Venezuela. Also, you also have the nature of these agreements, and we're going to talk later about, the general geopolitical background. But of course, we need to address immediately how these paradigm shifts also are being addressed and engaged by Venezuela. Also, how it's been up in the ante and, hedging the bet with the kind of strategic relationships Venezuela is engaging in. For example, I think it's pretty groundbreaking that there's going to be a direct flight from Algiers to Caracas. I mean, maybe it doesn't seem so spectacular, but it actually speaks volumes about a lot of things. One of them, for example, it's how close Africa actually is to South America. Yeah, I know for a fact, and people could tell you that we're like, for example, it's a 5-6 hours flight to West Africa. I guess it's going to be a bit more to Algiers. So in a sense, and it's an 8-9 flight to Buenos Aires. So first of all, that gives you like this geographical aha moment of how actually the map works, and how actually things are quite different of how they taught us. And then you have also that you're not going through Europe in this case to actually then go to Africa, which was the usual case, at least from the northern part of South America. So, and that also means a lot of things, in customs and air flights and protocols and so on. This is very important. Then you have another important strategic engagements, like the 20-year agreement with Iran. Mind you that also Iran only has this kind of agreements with a few countries. It's not something that they just sign with anyone. That also tells you where Venezuela is, and how also Venezuela, in a way, it's ingrained in what's actually happening in Eurasia. This also has another explanation if we look into the El Continente instead of to all the other parts of the world. If things wouldn't gone through where they went, and I mean general in the whole region, like in of course, Brazil, Bolivia, Argentina, you name it. And if the trend before El Comandante Chávez demise would have, hold, probably the approach with all this, with Eurasia and with the Belt and Road Initiative and the whole, and this paradigm shift, which has also other major goals that actually address and also face U.S. hegemony, it would be completely different. And given the uneven situation in the region is right now, and I'm talking now about South America, and Central America. I'm talking about America in general, except from the US and Canada, and the Caribbean. This also, like, it just put Venezuela in a place that they have to, well, start engaging by themselves and perhaps become one of the most important gateways of this new relationship. And this, in a way, opposes a bit of the plans that about that are linked in some way, theoretically linked to the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, like the Trans-Amazonic train, which actually goes through Peru and Brazil. But of course, this kind of big plans are postponed for obvious and several reasons, depending on the context you look at. So this is like the backdrop of where Venezuela is and how Venezuela is engaging in this Eurasian tour. And also, mind you, for example, if we go strict on geography, Algeria, of course, is not part of Eurasia by itself, but that's because it's not only a geographical definition, it's also a geopolitical one. And it also has to do with the North-South dialogue, which, well, it tells you what, metaphorically, the South is starting to say clearly.
So we'll get back to the geopolitical stuff, but I think it's very important. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a sum up of some of what you mentioned about how the economic recovery is looking in Venezuela. I was there in November and I saw a world of a difference from how things were in 2018, when things were very difficult for a number of reasons, but just visually and right off the bat, you feel a lot of differences now. Can you tell us, what's beneath the surface? What are some of the, how are you measuring that recovery in terms of the day-to-day in Venezuela?
Yes.
And,
yes.
What's behind that?
Yeah, well, probably if you visit us anytime soon, you're going to see even more difference than before. That's for sure. And I'm talking about, you were here in 2021. This year, you're going to see maybe not so strikingly different as the leap that you could see from 2018 to 2021. But nevertheless, you're going to see new stuff, I think, and I believe. There have been several reasons why Venezuela has recovered and still recovering, and there's still a lot of work to do here. It's not a solved situation. There's this, well, it's a joke, and I actually enjoy it a lot. And they also have they could have like a cynical angle also, but who cares? That's also part of the humor you also know from, for example, Caracas. It says Venezuela se arregló. So everything now that you're able to do something, anything, they just say Venezuela se arregló. What's going on? Well, Venezuela se arregló.
There are so many memes like that, and everyone is sending them to me every day.
Exactly. It's a meme thing. That's the thing. It's a meme situation that sums up, well, I think both. I mean, the good and the bad about where we at right now, especially from 2018. And you have some internal facts, and then you have also some external ones. But I think one, and I'll explain. One of the main takeaways is basically the sanction regime failed. I mean, if the political objective, I mean, the short-term political objectives of sanctions were like to provoke some sort of a public social upsetting that would ended up in some sort of upheaval situation, and it was going to, and all that drive was going to be led against the current government, and that afterwards would provoke some sort of regime change, because that would have been what people were asked for. So in that sense, specifically, sanctions completely failed. This has to do also because Venezuela was able to find a way to circumvent them. That's one of the key issues on their key areas, because of course, it was blocked inside the financial system. It was blocked in oil trade. You also had the secondary sanctions, which I think most are not aware of how destructive they were and how they also took over even more aspects of economic daily life, and also trade and foreign and international trade and whatnot. But there was a way. There was also, because also this is also important with the kind of alliance that the Venezuela established back in 2014, 2015. And this now includes, because Turkey comes into the fore afterwards, like in 2016. But it includes all these countries that are also in this, if most of them facing this kind of situation or similar ones that had to also to find their own ways to find creative solutions and alternatives to keep the trade going, the sale of resources also on, and so on, with a cost, of course. But that's one thing. It's in some way or another, several, and I'm not going to delve into that. Venezuela was able to, to circumvent and to fool sanctions in the sanction regime and allow it to, for example, to get more money, as simple as that. There were also other internal elements. Remittance, it's one of them, but also the release of foreign currencies. As you remember, previous to this moment, there was like very strict currency controls, which by itself provoked also a lot of, a black market of foreign currency, especially dollar-based and based by a market established in Cucuta, Colombia. But at the same time, it was validated by the IMF via economists like Steve Hanke and so on. So that created that sort of financial narrative about the Venezuelan currency, which actually had a major impact. And also, the credit rating and the whole package of financial, U.S. controlled financial legal tricks they could use against us. But the dollar wasn't one of them. So Venezuela was allowing the inner market and people to actually purchase and move in goods with and pay for stuff with dollars actually eased up a lot the critical elements of the Venezuelan purchase power. It was a short-term solution. It was an emergency solution. It's not dollarization because the Venezuelan national budget, so it's still designed in petros and bolívares, the current, our cryptocurrency, in order to prove that that's the national currency, legally speaking. So that eased up a bit, for example, the psychological elements of daily economy. And that was back after 2018, 2009, at the end of 2019. There's an important test on Venezuelan daily life that is significant, and it has a lot to do. I know it's not only a Venezuelan thing, but Venezuela, it's like pretty much, it's descriptive of Venezuela. It's like the holidays, the end of the year holidays, cultural and daily microeconomy. And it was striking how different it was then regarding the previous years, which was actually hell, and it was pretty frustrating. A lot of things didn't deliver. There was, in 2016, there was this notes crisis. There's a note shortage that actually complicated everything. And then you lacked some of the staple food of those months of December and so on. And so Christmas was actually insanely crappy. But suddenly in 2019, it wasn't. So people started to understand that something was actually changing. Another thing was to cut credits and to not allow the inflation speculative part, to keep moving. That it was a tough move, but it also brought inflation dramatically to a halt. And now it depends on from where you see it. It's a 2-digit numbers after, there were all these people saying it was 100,000% of inflation. And that was already there still. And there was a lot of problems, but there was a major change. And actually in 2020, it started also mildly to improve in that sense, because also new bets on the economy were placed in order to be exerted, such as especially in the industrial and agricultural and mining minerals, and also regardless of sanctions, spheres of economy. This was also important, but it wasn't something significant yet. Then came COVID, which actually, it complicated everything for us the same way it complicated the rest of the world. But we were also very prepared and trained to face that kind of, lack of things and shortages and disruption, and to be isolated and whatnot. That wasn't a big problem here, comparing to other countries that weren't used to this kind of fabricated situations. Afterwards, and this, bear in mind that sanctions were never eased off or waived. Yeah, it stopped. I mean, the number of executive orders or OFAC orders from the Department of Treasury decreased a lot with the change of government between Trump and Biden, but none of them were actually waived or
repealed,
canceled, or whatever. Appealed. Thank you. Yeah, that would be it. So this was all happening in spite of the sanction regime and the whole long-arm jurisdiction thing of the U.S. empire, because it also had like a strong element of criminalization and talking about a joint Bolivarian criminal enterprise, according to some crazy-ass think tank and so on. So you also had that perception having an impact on economy, and also it was easier like I was telling you, it was easier to move all these commodities. Also because the situation started to improve. But now you have better numbers. You have, according to several different agencies, it doesn't matter if it's Credit Suisse or La CEPAL, I don't know, the agency for the Latin American economy from the UN. I'm lazy to find the English acronym for it. And also, several other agencies, and also the IMF talking about Venezuelan growth now, actually in the positive, and regionally, above the average that I think, according to CEPAL, is something like 1.8%. Venezuela, it's expected to grow 5%, according to CEPAL. And this has also a major reason. Venezuela's also started to rely on real economy, where actually value is produced. And this also teaches you a lesson about real value in general, because, of course, you can think about, I don't know how productive the European or the Californian or the Texas economy are, but how many of those that economic activity is just clouds and apps and so on. It's not the real thing. But if we talk about food, if we talk about resources that actually turn into industry or energy, we're talking about the real deal. And that's actually the areas where Venezuela has focused. And one more time, in spite of sanctions, that also has, of course, made that Venezuela has received better investment, a different currency investment, not dollar-based necessarily, and engage in a close to normal trade activity with other countries, especially the Eurasian allies in this case. And then came this year, and when we saw already what's going on with the brilliant Euro and US sanctions against the Russian economy, the country with, perhaps the only country in the world that's self-sufficient in all the base natural primary commodity resources in the world. And that brought immediate blowback, and that also the need of the US to actually, buy again some of the Venezuelan oil and allow some of the European countries to also extract and purchase oil from Venezuela after so much. And that's also the only explanation, the pragmatic explanation of the US interest in reapproachment of trying to test the waters and sending feelers about on how to ease sanctions and how to modify the equation on the Venezuelan file, Cuban Venezuelan file at the end, but Venezuelan file. And if you visit rural areas, for example, because that's another thing, they talk a lot about all these big hotshots economies. They talk about agro industry, but the agro industry wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for small and medium farmers, campesinos in small scale land extensions that are actually the ones producing all these goods. And you can see it in some other aspects. Another good example, we have the clap boxes, as you know, which is like the helping program of the government in supplying monthly with low cost staple groceries of the Venezuelan diet, such as corn flour and also and pasta, spaghetti and rice and whatnot. And that's also a major indicator, because you can see there you can see above 90% of Venezuelan products in there. 2 or 3 years ago, rice was from I don't know, it could be from Mexico, from Guyana. Spaghetti could have been Turkish, and so on. And now they're all, if you check where they're made, they're Venezuelan made. That's also a major proof of all this process going on in recovery. So also another element, which is recent, pensions. There's been, after 7-8 years, there's been a raise in pensions in Venezuela. And finally, to sum it all up, all these big macroeconomic indicators shows a very positive picture, a hopeful one maybe, but there's still major issues about salary, about the value of work here, and the purchase of people that only rely on, for example, public salaries. That's like the main present issue on the economy and of course on daily life. It doesn't matter that Venezuela was able, and Venezuelans in general were able to, put into action what they call here in Caracas el resuelve, the solving, which is actually a classic thing, a classic popular working class thing here. Everyone knows how to resolver, how to, to get the extra money. Yeah, to find a way to get the extra money for make ends meet. So absolutely, it's a mixed situation, but it's a hopeful one. But anyway, we can't be too optimistic yet. And and the world's still very unstable, and we're still subject to a lot of pressure and dangers. But that's like the current picture right now.
Thank you so much for that, Diego. We're going to have to hand things over to Ali soon, but I have 2 last questions, so I'm going to ask you at the same time. One of them is if you could just summarize, you started to get into the role that the oil sector of Venezuela will have in this recovery going forward, and that's a question that a lot of international media has been trying to probe about. What is going on within these talks within the U.S. and Caracas. You may not know the exact answer, but maybe speak to us a little bit about that. And I also want to hear a little bit about your take on the way in which President Nicolas Maduro came right out of the gate as soon as the military operation of Russia began in Ukraine, because we saw a very precise position from Venezuela. And I think it was very important for the world and for Latin America, the way in which Nicolas Maduro, for example, he goes on television every Wednesday night for the Productive Wednesdays is basically the translation. Also, other nights of the week, he speaks with his cabinet, sometimes governors and meetings like that are televised on Venezuelan television. And he spoke very frankly about his position against NATO, against the imperialist aggression, and the way in which this is a war that's going to affect all of us throughout the entire world. And he warned about the way in which NATO could expand to even have an effect on us here in Latin America. He was very frank and very honest, but also very knowledgeable. And I also want to mention, going back to what we were saying about his Eurasian tour, that he was the longest serving foreign minister of President Hugo Chavez, and he has a lot of experience in that. This is someone who knows a lot about, not only the history, the recent history, because he's been in government for so long, the past couple of decades, overseas and everything. But he has just a great deal of familiarity with these things. And we also heard Chavez, address NATO and, some of the geopolitical issues abroad. So this is a very knowledgeable president, I think, and took a leadership role. So speak to us a little bit about that.
Well, let's start from that point, as in, because it also would explain the 2 other elements of this question, and we'll try to sum it up at the end. So help me out with this one, because I could easily get lost, and so it's always good to, to do a sign and bring me back. But yes, all of this, it's funny enough, but all of this, this is the lovely part about, underestimating someone, underestimating a guy that has like this very relaxed, provocative, hard to understand for some working class Caraqueño style of, engaging in public politics and how to explain things and how to do things. Usually, I don't know if you've checked President Maduro's TikTok account recently. He's like he's our. There's a word also here that I don't find a translation, but the word would be atorrante. He's like scorning in a nice way a lot of things just because being how he has been all these years, and that's just of course this is an aesthetical superficial element, but this goes deep because a lot of people think that he was just like an uncouth minion of Comandante Chavez with no charisma and no wits and no smarts and no knowledge or experience in politics in general, and that's actually the opposite. But that's have done wonders to underestimate el presidente Nicolas Maduro all these years. And they still actually make fun of him and do diminishing comments about him, about all the same tropes and topics of who he is, and suddenly he's still there. He's going to be 10 years in office after the next year, went through the worst crisis in recent history of Venezuela, and under the shadow of El Comandante Chavez leadership. People don't know, are not aware that Nicolas Maduro, for example, has been into politics since his 13 years. He was 13 years old. As a grassroots member of some of the left-wing parties and organizations from those days, and then when he got into the union organizing, and all this time supporting all this, the formal left-wing parties' initiatives, and how complex actually is to be a union leader in the Venezuelan subway metro system. That's also another element that people they don't have to be, but that also explains a lot of things, and it's something that has been also it has been neglected a lot on profiling him. And then you have the Chavista era, and yes, exactly, it also says so much in hindsight about how El Comandante Chavez's vision was so accurate about who to put where. Think about all this kind of situations in a more interconnected world, in a more complex, contradictory deglobalization moment. If Nicolas Maduro wouldn't been Chavez foreign minister for 7 years and facing all this major shift, and also to rule, to govern, to keep governance in the country during such periods of turmoil. And it also brings another element that's also important, which is audacity. Has been how audacious he has been taking some risks at some moments, and people didn't even understand why he did that. And I'm talking about foreign policy decisions. I'm talking about domestic decisions. For example, in 2017, we were going through the worst violent moment on a color-coded style kind of situation, with non-conventional warfare going fever pitch, and his way out was basically to call for a National Constituent Assembly, and no one, that was the 1st of May in 2017, none of us actually understood what was going on. Afterwards, no one didn't expect something like that and didn't understand it until a few days, to making sense. I remember talking to a friend and I told him I went full theological on that one because I'm trusting what I am ignoring. That also has to do with the oil policy, by the way. But and then suddenly, when the vote was cast, when the poll was held, violence completely grounded to a halt. It stopped. It had some residual hot spots for a couple of days, but it then stopped completely. And actually, that's when the U.S. go full sanction mode on us.
Exactly. And I think when the National Constituent Assembly took office, right after that was when the, Mercosur decided to exclude or suspend Venezuela from the body. A lot more happened, within the OAS, and things really picked up. Give us a little bit. about the economic recovery in the oil sector before we hand it over to
Yes,
Ali.
and this is important to address this exact part because precisely of that, because that's actually after the National Constituent Assembly election and then, arrival into office. That's when actually the U.S. government, the Department of Treasury, sanctioned directly the oil industry. I mean, these were the meanest and hardest blows against the Venezuelan economy and against the Venezuelan economical lifeline. And it was when the news was tight in Venezuela was more isolated, and it created this system along with the other sanctioned partners of how to sell this oil and find ways to do it somewhere else with different actors and whatever, and also the same with gold and so on. This is what the U.S. criminalizes, and this is also actually why Alex Saab is still a U.S. hostage now in Florida, because that's punishment after creating this kind of solutions and taking the risk to do it, and also holding insanely the line of the basic non-negotiables about what Venezuela is. It's, regardless of how much ground you lost in the political battles, but as in sovereignty, as in dignity, as in what's going to Venezuela actually allow and so on. So, and then you saw, if we come fast forward to 2022, and we saw what El Presidente Nicolas said about his statements at the earliest stage of the war, of the special military operation of Russia against the NATO aircraft carrier, the U.S. NATO aircraft carrier that Ukraine is, with actually the best proxy army they have in the whole world. Nicolas Maduro, that's also not one of those moments, because this has happened a lot, and in each and every moment of these public appearances and these television addresses and showing and explaining to the people any given situation, especially foreign policy or international relations or geopolitical situations, Nicolas Maduro has always explained a lot. And this also tells you a lot about, first, the kind of alliance that we have and how actually has to do with who were with us during the worst moments, and how also the coincidence of interests are also based there. And also to understand precisely where the world is headed, where Venezuela should be, and where are these paradigms in international relations and so on are going to happen. And this is also an informed opinion. It's not only that Maduro is a wizard or something. I mean, this is a guy who actually studies a lot and knows he has done his homework on all these elements. And the thing is that you can say anything about how weird or how crazy things he said in the past made no sense, but suddenly afterwards they did. And this is another key example of that. And also where Venezuela is placed now in a radical way in the North and South dialogue, because a lot of people, we're completely unacceptable in the woke, liberal, progresista paradigm or concept of sovereignty and the left and so on, which is better. We don't need that, actually, and this is also proof of that. I mean, we're not lost. We're not drifting away and trying to know where we actually at and concerning about the small topic, single topic campaigns that are actually part of the discussion and the conversation in a lot of political circles now, because we also know the value of what actually means to be in an existential situation, what actually means a whole country to survive, what actually means, and how unsexy, how unspectacular it is to fight against all this. I mean, people don't understand how much this kind of situation actually suck, regardless of the epics of all this, because of course there is an epic, and we don't have like the perfect narrator that we had with El Comandante Chavez. Now we have normal people, smart people now trying to do. I mean, people they're not larger than life. If you compare that aspect, Chavez and Maduro, and because of how outstanding El Comandante is, when it's easier to think about making decisions without all this white noise and all this narrative things, all this meme thing that actually it's like the definition of Western and yes, most of South American political views in the political establishments, regardless if they are right-wing neoliberals or is it a new left progresistas and whatnot. That's the main difference, and it's also, I mean, Walter Benjamin said that fascism was the aestheticization, sorry for that, of politics. So yeah, Venezuelan for some, it's actually basically an aesthetical problem because it doesn't comply with all what the perception they need to understand and to feel good about the world. And then it's going to be a shocker, and it's already starting to be that shocker for a lot of people now that you're going to go through the same kind of things in lots of places in the world, just because we were, in a way, along with other countries, and you can think also about Palestine, and you can think about Syria, and you can think about Iran, the canary in the coal mine of what actually the world can see if it's only going to be based on profit and this new, like Pepe Escobar says, a techno-feudal model of life.
Thank you so much, Diego.
Thank you, Camila.
It's been great to speak to you. We're going to have to hand things over to Ollie, but it was great to hear about how things are right now in Venezuela and the recovery process, and of course, leadership of President Super Bigote, Nicolas Maduro.
Exactly.
So this is the cultural section of our show. We're not just going to have political talk. We also want to put in the cultural section because in Latin America, politics is so bound up in history, culture, music, food. From there, you can learn so much about each Latin American country. And since we're going to have, every episode, a new guest from a different country, we want to use that as an opportunity to explore the cultural life of each place. And so
that's wonderful.
Venezuela, I'd like to talk about food because Venezuela has some of the best food anywhere in the Americas. And just full disclosure, I've never been to Venezuela. I've never lived in Venezuela. However, I'm extremely acquainted with Venezuelan food, having lived in Peru, Ecuador, and even here. I would rank it top three in the region, absolutely. And so the format we want to do for this, Diego, is
yes,
I'm going to host a dinner party, and you're going to be a guest, and I'm going to lay out a Venezuelan platter, and then at the end you're going to evaluate it. You're going to give it a score out of 10, whether it's terrible, whether it's great. So we'll dive right in. So we're going to have you round. We're going to have 5-6 other people. It's going to be a proper dinner party. So for a starter, we've got to go with some hors d'oeuvres. And what I'm thinking is tiny little arepas, sort of small bites. I think there's a name for that, right? The small ones like orejit.
Arepitas.
Right?
Yeah.
And we need to keep it light. We don't want the guests to be full, at the start. So I reckon reina pepiada. What's reina pepiada is avocado and sort of pulled chicken, bit of mayonnaise mixed together inside the arepa. Arepa itself, for the people who don't know, is made out of cooked corn flour, which you sort of, add water. You make it into sort of, how would you describe it, Diego? How the process of making an arepa?
Well, you already started, and there's a major controversy on what do you put first? Is it the flour or the water? In my case, I usually calculate with. For me, it's easier, to calculate based on how much water there is, and then I'll pour in the.
Oh, really? I always use flour first.
Sorry.
I always use flour first.
Yeah, a lot of people do that. I don't know. It's maybe. I think it's also. I don't think if it's taste or is it just. When was the moment that you made your first proper arepas without screwing it up? So arepa is also very basic in how it's made. It's a very simple, and I think that's an important element of Venezuelan food. I believe it comes, you can, I mean, Venezuelans can eat arepa the whole day, but now I'll go back to that afterwards. The thing is that, yeah, you pour the flour and then you pour the salt. I mean, it depends on how salty you want your arepa to be the arepa dough, la masa, to be done. And also, you can also think about that. You can calculate that according to what's going to be the fillings that you're going to put in. And basically, the arepa, you can fill it with absolutely anything, not sweet, but absolutely anything. So that's also something you can also take into account. But that's not the only way to make arepas, because you can throw in some, I don't know, carrot, for example, cheese, or chicharrón with its, the pork crust that you can also get it in Bolivia and Peru. And
arepas for Venezuelans is like pasta for Italians. It's the staple. It's like the base,
absolutely,
the baseline.
Absolutely, yes. It's the baseline would be correct. And small arepitas are only they're going to serve you those only, like you say, as hors d'oeuvres, or maybe to accompany a soup. Any kind of soup. That's the only actual moment. Sorry, that's the only actual moment that you are going to see the small arepitas. And sometimes you can even get, corn, or someone could actually tell you something about how small your arepas could be. So, and then another key element of the arepa is el budare, which is like how do you say it? It's like this flat rectangular pan. Well, not doesn't have to be rectangular. It could also be round, but each and every house has one, and and also basically, it could be even inherited from from generations in a house. But each and every household must have their own budares, and budares must be curated and must be used in time in order to fulfill its duties. And because there's also there's a saying that you got stuck into something like a new budare, because that could happen when the budare is new. I mean, the dough could stick to the budare the first time, and that's going to happen the first time you use it. But the budare, it's also fundamental. It doesn't matter if it's going to be on a kitchen or it's going to be with wood fire. But that's also essential for the arepas. You can do it also on pans. I've tried to do it. I mean, when I've been overseas and I try to do arepas and explain what arepas are, you have to do it in frying pans, and sometimes in some cases I destroyed some pans, and in other ones it was successful. So it depends. You should also throw a little oil there to prevent the arepas to get stuck. But arepas
you can deep fried as well. But that's incredibly greasy. It can
that,
be quite heavy.
Arepa frita, yes, arepa frita is also important, and it's something that usually you also do for kids, which is okay. It's not the most healthy option, but it's usually the easy one. At night when you're tired and you just want to, feed the kids and go to sleep or whatever, and get ready for the next day. And sometimes you throw chicharrón there also. So you throw pork into the dough for the fried arepa. It's one of my favorite things here also, by the way. So yes, arepa, you can have arepa for los tres golpes, for the 3 meals of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think since we're using this as a start, we don't want to get people bloated right at the beginning.
You have to put a little of everything, or maybe also you have like nata, which is a bit more solid, milk cream, and also you have cheese, or you have guasacaca. I don't know if you're familiar with guasacaca.
Oh yeah, is that like green sauce, isn't it?
It's a green sauce based on avocado and green stuff. It doesn't matter what green sauce. You just throw it into it and a bit of vinegar, and you just blend it, and that's it. And it also you have a different kind of consistency for it.
Okay, cool. So we're starting off with a platter of mini arepitas, starter, finger food. Then we're going on to the main dish. The structure of this, by the way, I should have said, we're gonna have a starter, main dish, a drink, and then some music in the background. So the main dish, my favorite #1 Venezuelan dish, that I ate just practically all the time when I lived in Ecuador, is pabellón. Pabellón criollo is a super protein plate, really. You can make it some different ways, right? But it basically consists of sort of pulled beef, black beans, you got plantains, yellow
Mhm.
plantains fried, white
Yes.
rice. I like it when I add a little bit of avocado in there, but that's not
Correcto.
the
That would,
doesn't have
yeah,
to
yeah.
be.
The avocado is fundamental. Yeah, that correcto.
Yeah.
That's a basic. That's also the baseline for pabellón.
Oh,
Pabellón
really? Because
mean,
sometimes they don't have it. I've seen it.
yeah, that's bad people that don't love you. Or there's no avocado around. But yeah, you should have your avocado there. It's fundamental, man.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
As I said,
it's
a little bit
yeah.
cheese as
There,
well.
yes, those are other different controversies there, especially on the black beans. They call here caraotas, carolinas,
Mm.
because in the western and central Venezuela, I mean, it's important how it's, how do you say el guiso? I know you have the word for that one, but you know
Yeah.
the
So
part where
stew, gravy.
exactly, and what you throw into it as you know, spicy pepper, ají they call it here, and where it could be onions and so on. And some people
Mm.
also, you have to have some sort of, you know, it could be pork bones or pork chops. You can add it to it, or something like that. You know, to put la malicia into
Yeah.
the dish. Some people do cheat, and they throw in something which is heresy to throw like cubes. Or to use ketchup a
Oh,
bit to also do the trick, but the main controversy it's the western and central part of Venezuela, they just leave it like that. It's a salted plate. But in the
mm.
eastern and Oriente part of, and you can throw in some cheese and sometimes mayo, which is a radical option, but it's also very widespread. But then you also have on the eastern part of Venezuela, they actually throw in sugar. They make it sweet.
Oh.
And this is an unreconcilable situation between the El Oriente de Venezuela and the western part of Venezuela.
Is this because the
Now,
East is a sugar producing? Do they put it in everything, or is it just?
I mean, the Eastern, yeah, they do have a lot of extremely sweet stuff, you know, with a lot of very sugary, but not necessarily because you produce sugar also in the western part of Venezuela. I don't know. I think it has to do with the Oriental el character spirit. Because if you think about if you're in Caracas and you're going to move to the west of Venezuela, you're going to say, I'm going to Los Andes, I'm going to Lara State, I'm going to Zulia, I'm going to Los Llanos, be it Apure, Barinas. When you go to Oriente, you always say, me voy a Oriente, I'm going to Oriente. So it has, and so it's pretty common in all of Oriente, coastal Oriente or the more inner lands, which are plains, and then you have the southeastern part of Venezuela, which is Bolivar, where the mines are, with the tepuyes and the national parks. But they all have that problem. That's something. I mean, it's an ongoing situation that's never, ever gonna stop.
But I
And
mean, that sounds quite extreme because I mean, pretty much every Latin American country like sugar, has too much sugar,
yes,
in my opinion. That's just
yes,
as a background thing. So if there's a region of Venezuela where it's even higher than that average, that's quite alarming.
yeah. It's pretty radical in that sense. And also pabellón. It's not an. I think it's not an exclusive one of Venezuela because you have bandera in the coastal Caribbean, Colombian Caribbean coast. This is also, I mean, it's
Mm.
more than understandable that to happen. And I think they also have bandera in Ecuador. Pabellón also means bandera. But you
Mm.
have also different kinds of pabellón here. You can the pulled meat. You can replace it with chihuire, with capybara in the Llanero states,
Yeah.
for example. Or you can
I've
have
heard you can do it.
a
You can even put alligator.
yeah. That's not. It's easier to find capybara, and because I
Yes,
mean
I'm sure.
some seasons in the year it's allowed to. Caceria food is something that's not. I mean, you have to be lucky to be in some place that someone brings it. It's not something you're going
Yeah.
to buy in the. Usually, it's something it's not you're going to buy at the store. But yeah,
Yeah.
and in the coast you can also have like fish instead of pulled meat, but also pulled fish. The carne mechada would be the when you break it into small threads.
Yeah, absolutely. But one thing I find really interesting about this dish is that a lot of people say it represents every part of Venezuela, all the different cultures of Venezuela. Because you've got the black
Yes.
beans, which in every sort of Latin American, Caribbean country is something that came in through African populations coming to Latin
Yes.
America.
Yes.
You've got the white rice, which is obviously European. You've got the meat, the
Hmm.
plantains, which is more indigenous. So it sort of in one dish, you got all
Yeah,
the different sort of cultural backgrounds and the history.
it's a sum up of how mestizo culture is in America Latina in general, in the Caribbean.
So that's the main dish, pabellón criollo, my favorite.
Yes.
So this is in the evening, it's a dinner party, so I think we're allowed to drink. We're gonna have a drink that Camila used to bring back from Venezuela many times whenever she went there. It's cucuy. Can you explain to people what cucuy is?
Cocuy is a very, very, very different, interesting option. It's massive consumption. It's something actually pretty recent, and it has to do, by the way, with the Bolivarian Revolution coming into power. It has everything to do with that. It's very interesting because, yes, absolutely, because it was banned by the Cuarta República government. It was not only banned; it was persecuted. People were jailed because of making cocuy, and their small alambiques or the small workshops they used to make the cocuy, they were all destroyed, and so it was punished. My grandmother was from a town called Humocaro Bajo in Lara State, and cocuy comes from Lara and Falcón State in the northwestern part of Venezuela. And if you in those days, if you have to go to the bodega to buy cocuy, you had to ask for el 7x8, 7 times 8, because of the 56 degrees of the alcohol. That was the only way to ask for to buy it. And it was a code name for cocuy in my grandmother's township, and that was back in the day. So
is this also, because it's associated with the popular classes then?
Especially, it also has medicine properties, and also yes, and it is ancestral. Cocuy, it's like a sister cousin of mezcal, more than tequila. People compare it to tequila, but I think it's not accurate. I think it's closer to mezcal.
I think we didn't mention that this is liquor made from agave.
Agave, yes, it's a seraphitic plant, also like a cacti, but not exactly one, that grows in the dry areas of Lara and Falcón. That's where the cocuy actually comes from. So, and actually there was a commemoration recently, I don't know how many years, I think 20 years, of the decriminalization of cocuy production in Venezuela. And also there was an interesting conference about cocuy and land production, because it's also important economically, and it well done with the proper timings, with the proper plant, at the proper age, and through and also buried underground for a couple of months with some food and something. That's going to be the best drink you could ever have. But you have to drink it. It's preferable to drink it just without anything, without mixing it with anything.
Agreed.
That would be the ideal situation. It doesn't happen like that anymore, and because of the legalization of cocuy, and also the normalization, and also to follow the consumption protocols, and to have a denomination of origin and so on, it has massified a lot. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we were a few of us who were actually, prophets of cocuy. It wasn't something that you couldn't still buy anywhere. I did several travels in that time with other cocuy crazies to go and buy big jugs of cocuy in La Sierra de Falcón, which is a magical place. It has also a lot to do with where it comes from. El cocuy it's a Hirajara, an Ayaman, Caquetío drink. It had also, because it also has a lot of medicinal properties. It's used for people with high sugar, impotence, high pressure, you name it. It has a lot of use, and you have also higher degrees of cocuy that's not for drinking, that you also use it for wounds, for hard blows on some part of the body. You just stroke it there for stroking, para sobar. So it has all of this, and of course it's a major competition to the liquor companies and the beer companies back in the day, where everything was an oligopoly here. So it has also that political, economic aspect to it. So you also have a lot of shady cocuys, a lot of them going on, and some of them could be actually pretty dangerous because sometimes they have to fast forward the maturing process with urea, with fertilizer.
Urea,
I mean,
that's fertilizer.
Yeah, exactly, and that could, of course, that's going to be, you're going to have a bottle quite quick, a liter of it, but you're gonna get someone killed, or someone with a terrible,
that's
terrible,
a
terrible. Yes, exactly, and you can have someone with at least, if not dead, with a terrible, terrible, I mean, vicious, poisonous hangover with a crappy cocuy. And that could also happen if you start making a very good pure cocuy with with soft drinks or like mojitos. They do that a lot here with mojitos with passion fruit or whatever. It could get, I mean, it could get you even more drunk. So it has even like a ceremonial thing to it, and you have to. And if you don't, for example, if you don't have you can't drink cocuy with an empty stomach. You can go crazy. For example, you can't mix cocuy with other drinks like rum or something like that, because you're not only going to get crazy, you're going to get immediately hammered, and you're going to also go black. You're going to be blackout. You know. You're going to fall, and you're not going to remember anything. Lots of bad things can happen. You can't drink cocuy on a high place and go to a lower place, as in, being in La Sierra Falcón and go to the coastal area, because it's going to go up to your head, and the pressure is going to do its work, and you could even die, man. If someone is actually vulnerable. But that's an extreme case. But I mean, it has some serious elements.
I can see how that would happen. I can see how that would happen with cocuy.
Moving on. That's the dangerous part. But they have all the goods about cocuy. So it's definitely put some cocuy there. Definitely, at least a cup of short drinks, not to drink as a shot, but slowly, and that could make wonders.
Absolutely. So the last section, we're gonna have obviously music on in the background, and Venezuelan music is fantastic. There's so many choices we could go for here, but my personal favorite, as an Andean here in Bolivia, is I love el joropo, música llanera. Joropo is. Can you tell us a bit about where that comes from? Because it's not a Caribbean form of music. So what sort of regions of Venezuela is it typically?
Yes, that's important. There are several regions, different regions in Venezuela that actually calls their traditional music joropo. The most famous one, of course, is llanero joropo, el joropo llanero, which actually has a huge amount of subclassifications. 6x8, guacharaca, 6x derecho, ¿cómo se llama? Corrido, pasaje. It depends on on harmonical and rhythmical elements, but also depends on the mood, because a pasaje, it's a sentimental despecho, love or heartbroken kind of song. But in a corrido, you're going to talk about like a corrido, like a classic corrido anywhere in Latin America. You're going to talk about the history about something or someone, and you have all that. And it's important, the basic setting of the musician, of el conjunto llanero, are actually the harp, the llanero harp, which is similar to the Paraguayan one, the maracas, el cuatro, which is, of course, the national instrument. It's a 4-string instrument that kind of resembles to English speaking people could be the ukulele, to the Colombians it could be the tiple, and also the Mexicans have some other instrument whose name I'm not sure of, in the jarocho music. That's similar. It has the same affination that the cuatro has. And the llanero music, it's very particular, and the music sometimes it's may not vary too much, but the important thing there, it's also content. It's what it says and who's singing. That's very, very, very important. Llanero music, that also you can find the same exact llanero music in the Colombian llanos, in the Colombian plains. The same exact and the same popular musical heroes, and sometimes in Colombia they sing about the massacre of campesinos in Venezuela, or the other way around. There's a famous Masacre del Bichada by El Cazador Novato that was actually singing about a campesino massacre in El Bichada in Colombia. And you have like that cross-border thing with that kind of joropo. Then you have the joropo central, which actually encompasses Miranda, part of Carabobo, yes, Aragua state, and part of Guárico, part of northern Guárico, which is very, very different. And it has the same premises as in what you say is important, who's singing is important, but the setting is even more basic. It's just a harp, arpa y buche. El buche, it's a sack. I mean, yeah, like a sack, like a bag, and that's how they call also the stomach here. And the buche is the singer. At the same time, he also has to play maracas. And that kind of harp, its origins are not so clear. It's a metal corded harp. And it also resembles a lot to the griot music from Western Africa. So that gives you like a hint, right? And there are a lot of theories about it, about how,
But this is, I think it's important to say that it's always about storytelling, right? It has
absolutely
a beginning and end, and it doesn't have a structure of, say, traditional pop song. And
it does have actually it's a pretty firm structure, but it's so flexible, the content and how you say it and the wording, that you don't necessarily have to identify it immediately, if you're not used to listening.
We were speaking to the Bolivia's ambassador in Venezuela, actually, Sebastián Michel, and I was talking to him about how much I love. We were talking about Venezuela and saying how much I love música llanera, and he said, I do like it, but what I don't like about it is it doesn't have a chorus. I love songs that have a chorus that I can sing along to.
It makes sense. Yes, that's
doesn't
right.
have that structure.
No, they don't have that structure. That's right. You can find more of that as in chorus and more, more circle structures in the Oriental, Eastern Joropo, which you also have, especially in Sucre state, which is like the northeastern coast of Venezuela. That's a very sophisticated place. It's very different to, I think, to all Venezuela. I mean, be it cuisine, be it literature, be it music, and also drinks. Sucre and Cumaná in particular it's insanely interesting. And also, the Joropo Oriental, it has the same kind of lines. But it has different instrumentation also. It does have the cuatro, of course, but it also have a bandola oriental. A bandola, it's another instrument, 4-string instrument in the bandola llanera. But I think the bandola oriental, if I'm not mistaken, it has 5 or 6 chords. It has different affination and so on. And also the themes are different because it has also to do with el temperamento, with the spirit of the Orientales, which is actually a very, fast-thinking, humorous, pícaro kind of subjects. But when they get emotional, they get nostalgic, the Oriental went to Caracas or to a different port. They're uncomparable in the sentimentality, and they also have all these genres of the Eastern music, not only joropo, because they also have punto y llanto, punto de navegante. You have el polo, la malagueña, la jota, which also talks about a strong influence of Spanish music there. At its base, it's not Spanish at all, but in the kind of instrumentation and the name and the way they call these kind of songs. But they're uncomparable in their sentimentality. It's incredibly moving. One of the major exponents of this perhaps could be, this is like the most one, I think, Gualberto Ibarreto. And also in the joropo, Eastern joropo, I would think about Hernán Marín. And then you have Maria Rodriguez, which is also an insane singer, wonderful, rebellious Chavista singer, proud cumanesa. Also, was close into brujeria and reading the tobacco and so on. It was and dancing and the dresses she had. She was amazing. She died, I think it was like 5 years ago or something. You also have like this huge treasure of musicians and traditions that actually change from one township to another. Yes, there are going to be some that are actually, traditionally going to be the most important ones, where the best guitarists, the best arepistas, the best singers or whatever. But one of the things about the Venezuelan traditional music, wherever you are, is that it changed, and it could change dramatically from one small township to another. But and you can't think about having a Venezuelan scene music without adding some of the other Western musics, especially the Larense music from the Lara state, the Tamunangue, which is like the more, they say the commonplace is like the more balanced one according to the heritage of the Black, the Indigenous, and the Spanish thing. And it's also, and that's also, I mean, I have to be a bit chauvinistic because part of my family hails from the Lara state, but under lots of standards, it's like one of the most important also. And then you have also the coast with the tambores, which is completely Afro. I mean, you can get lost in this for years, just investigating Venezuelan music.
So that's
and also, and we also have salsa, man. That's also important here in Caracas.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. So this is the dinner party I've hosted, right? We've got the starters, reina pepiada, arepas, arepitas. For the main, we got the pabellón criollo. We've got a bottle of cocuy on the table. We've got joropo, música llanera going on in the background. To be honest, I think I nailed the food, if I say so myself. I think the controversies where I wasn't sure myself was in the drink, because Venezuela also produces some of the best rum in the world, right? Brands like Diplomático are considered, objectively as some of the best, highest quality brands in the world. I didn't include
they are. It's true.
Instead. And and the music, of course, in Caracas, for example, what the people listen to is salsa. Some brilliant forms of salsa in Venezuela.
Absolutely.
But we didn't go for that. We went for the joropo. So how would you evaluate this? If you could give a score out of 10, or if you think there was an element there that could have been replaced with someone else?
No, I think I'll give it like a solid 9. I mean, it's on the mark. Why I'm not taking one point out, because you're not going to start with Venezuelan music and you're going to finish the party just with Venezuelan music. If you're in Caracas,
oh really?
It's going to finish with salsa, man. Absolutely. Right. I mean, that would be if you're in Caracas. It could keep it could be different on some other places, but the salsa, especially in Caracas, it's gonna be at some point. It's have to be there. It's gonna be there. So overall, actually, it's a 10 because it's a pretty accurate decision. Maybe you have to, before you plan the whole thing, you have to make a choice if you're going with rum or you're going with cocuy, because it has different outcomes. I would say, but and mixing them, you can put both there. You can just allow people to make their pick.
To mix?
Yeah, it's dangerous to mix, but I mean, if you go full democratic, you're going to put the 2 options there, as for people to make their own decision of which one of them would be. And probably at the end, at some point, when one of the ones runs out, everyone's going to drink the other one that's available, and it's going to end up even more messy and noisy, and 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 if you're in Caracas and you get really drunk, you're going to go to the beach
Venezuelans
afterwards.
don't really speak in these sorts of situations. It's just shouting, right? Like, that's very different to Bolivian culture, where people are a lot more quiet.
but I think it's more a northern Venezuela thing in general. I mean, Caraqueños are gonna be screaming, Cumaneses, and from Margarita, Nueva Esparta would also, but also the people from Maracay were going to scream. But as you move further south, you're going to see different people. For example, the Andinos, the Indian, they don't scream at all. They're not noisy, and in the way that a Caraqueño is. No, they're not. They're not this invasive, overconfident, yelling Caraqueño. They're going to be pretty discreet, pretty low key. They're going to be much more economic with words. They're going to be more respectful with the language they use. They're going to get upset if you use a foul language. I mean, they're pretty sensitive about it. And actually, it's pretty nice. And if being from Caracas, it makes you think a lot when you're outside of Caracas, and how the rest of Venezuela sees a Caraqueño. And also with the Llanero can scream or something, but also he's going to be pretty careful about the language he uses and how he's going to represent himself before others and that kind of things. But yeah, we're like the most with the Zulianos, I think, and with the Northern Orientales, like the more noisy ones.
Okay, well, on that note, we'll start wrapping it up after achieving a solid 9. for my Venezuelan dinner party. Thank you, Diego, for coming on, speaking with us.
No, thank you, man. This was pretty fun, actually.
Yeah, your first ever guest, first ever episode 1 of Latin America.
Thank you so
Review.
much. That's an honor.
Cheers, Diego.
Cheers, man. Thank you very much.